Good morning, everybody. Let everybody file in. Thanks for joining me at halftime here. Unfortunately, Mr. Bloom's got some issues with his voice, so we weren't able to do the usual 10 o'clock hangout. And I'm not going to be there next week, so we may try to do something similar to this. Not sure. We'll sort of see how it goes. But hope you guys are enjoying the game so far. At least there's been a little bit more scoring than what we've seen in London in the past. Got a few things going on. Let a few more people get in here. So yeah, I think Lamar Miller, and I'm getting a lot of questions on Devonta Freeman this morning too, but let's start out by talking about Miller. I think there was some discussion about whether or not he's dealing with a stinger, whether or not he may have a little bit of an AC sprain up on the ligament of the shoulder, or whether or not he took a blow to the outside of the shoulder. He said earlier in the week that he had a little bit of numbness, and I think that's make it less likely a stinger. He said the MRI didn't show any a stinger. So I think he got hit on the outside of his shoulder, and there's a nerve that kind of comes out from behind the shoulder there, the top part of the arm. And if he's got some numbness there, that may be what the medical staff in Houston is concerned about. They're not going to want to send him out there if there's a chance that that can be aggravated and contribute to some numbness and weakness for a little bit longer than just this week. Miller says he's going to play. I think the expectation right now is he's going to play, but Ian Rappaport said this morning that there's some concern from the medical staff and the team itself about how long he's going to be able to go, how well he's going to be able to play. So that just makes it a tough decision for us because you just don't know. Are they concerned about him taking another hit to the area? Are they concerned because his strength and range of motion hasn't returned yet? If it's the first, it's really hard to know whether or not he's going to take a hit. If it's the second, if they're concerned about some ongoing symptoms that he has, then they may limit him either way. So I think what sticks in the back of my mind is there were multiple times over the past couple of years in Miami where Miller wasn't able to come back in the second half. Last week he did, but he's really not been a player that's taken a huge workload with a current or after a recent injury. So it makes me a little bit nervous. I said earlier in the week that I don't think you're going to see the 20 to 25 touches that we've seen from him in the past. I think we're probably more in the 12 to 15 range right now, but if he feels good earlier in the day, early in the game in the first quarter, it could easily be more. Alfred Blue isn't necessarily a huge threat from a talent perspective. He fumbled last week. They were a little bit worried about him. Yeah, I looked to the side. I know, I'm sorry. I'm kind of keeping an eye on Twitter, and I'm keeping an eye on the game as the same thing goes. So I have a bad habit of looking away a little bit. I'll try to stare right into the camera for you guys. So I think that's the deal with Miller. It's going to be really hard for me to tell you whether or not this turns into a 5 to 10 touch game or whether it turns into a 15 to 20 touch game. I think, for you fantasy guys, as I tweeted, the injury beat's gotten me so busy right now that it's hard for me to say, Miller's an RB1 versus RB2, or Miller is, the running back 5 this week versus the running back 20. So I think you guys are going to have to make your own decisions there. When I make my decisions on those sorts of things, I generally just look at my football guys' projections and go from there. So, okay, let's talk about Devonta Freeman because I've gotten a lot of questions about him in the last few minutes, wondering about hip pointer. I think Adam Schefter must have said something on the ESPN pregame show that's not been tweeted out yet that defined his injury as a hip pointer. And with the recent concerns from Odell Beckham and him being limited last week, I think that's kind of scared some folks off. Freeman essentially fully practiced this week. He did not get listed as a full practice on Wednesday. That's because they didn't allow him to take contact. And I think they knew that he had a little bit of some soreness in that hip, and they knew that Tevin Coleman wasn't going to play this week. So they did not want to put him in any risk of limiting him later in the week by him taking an unnecessary hit on Wednesday. But practiced fully on Friday, practiced fully on Thursday. I don't think there's much concern. Hip pointers are painful, but hip pointers are not all alike. So it depends on how much bruising there is, exactly where it is in relationship to the thin muscles and nerve just overlying that part of the pelvic bone there. So I think he's going to play, and I don't think there's too much concern there. I think everything else today, has been fairly straightforward. So we weren't going to have a whole lot to talk about on the show anyhow. LaShawn McCoy is not going to play. We know that Des Bryant is going to play. Marshall, Hilton, Jones, all those guys. Cobb's a little bit of a concern going forward and wasn't too big of a surprise because I didn't really feel like his last couple of days of practice was a big concern. Yeah, I think John Brown is going to go. Terrell Pryor is not listed on the injury report. We saw Jordan Reed come back without too much difficulty. I'm not worried about Jimmy Graham or Martellus Bennett. Mike Gillislee seems like he's going to be a full go. So I think, most of these guys, the real big concern right now is Miller. I don't think there's too much else going on necessarily. So let's see. We're going to go through some questions here for you guys. We're going to cut this short in about 10 minutes or so to to be sure that we save some time for inactives. So yeah, so let's double back. Who else was in my tweet there before? Jordan Reed was included, but Des Bryant and Dante Moncrief, both of those guys should be close to full workloads today. The only reason that they wouldn't see their usual number of snaps is that they cannot replicate what goes on in the game. You can't replicate live game action and the stress of a game in practice. But both of those guys have taken contact at this point. They're both likely to play very close to the normal snaps. I'm not expecting there to be too much difficulty with them. But they have to be reassimilated to the offense. Neither one of those guys have been back for 4 to 5 weeks now, probably a little bit longer for both of them, honestly. And so they haven't been within the game plan so much. But those guys have both been vital parts of the game plan in the past. I would expect them, I think you can reasonably expect them to get at least 75% of their pre-injury workloads. I don't think they're going to be in and out of the game as much. I think what you've seen with Tyler Eifert last week and other players in the past, maybe even Lamar Miller today, does not apply to those guys. They're going to be in good enough physical condition to play. It's all going to depend on how many offensive snaps they take and whether or not their quarterbacks look in their direction. I don't have much information about Cobb. When these guys come out of bye weeks with an injury, and they aren't able to play, and we're not sure whether or not it's something that's been lingering for weeks or something that was aggravated earlier in the week, it's hard to know. I think we'll know based on Wednesday's practice report whether or not Cobb is coming back sooner or not. Ty Montgomery had an illness, doesn't seem to be too much concern with him playing today. Tyler Lockett has a thigh contusion. He's going to play today. His issue is just target share. There's too many other mouths to feed in that offense right now. They have a relatively good matchup for sure with New Orleans, but are the balls going to Baldwin, Curse, Graham, Michael? All of those guys are probably at least as involved, if not more involved, with Lockett. You're looking for a longer term or a long downfield pass with him probably. Ebron should be okay. Riddick should be okay. You can put Ebron and Riddick in the same category as Bryant and Moncrief. Yeah, I will believe that Ben Roethlisberger misses a division game against the Ravens that they need to win in favor of Landry Jones when I see it. We have seen him recover before the earliest side of return to play estimates multiple times in the past. He's returned 2 games in which it really didn't look like he'd be able to come back in the past. But Adam Schefter is as good as it gets, and if there's some concern that he'll be able to clear this week, then I think you have to see where that goes. Somehow he made his way, Roethlisberger did, out to throw in practice last week. That doesn't mean that his knee's going to be cleared to allow him to play in the pocket. So we'll sort of see how that goes. I still think there's a chance that we see him in Week 9, but there have been a couple of reasons to be concerned. There's been issues with Ladarius Green from the beginning here. So, is it some level of fussiness with the team, level of trustworthiness? If we bring Ladarius Green back into practice, start planning to use him as part of our game planning, and then something else happens with the ankle or there's a headache injury, I don't know. I don't know if it's flakiness from Green, if it's just the usual concern that we see from Pittsburgh with Tomlin and otherwise. I'm not really sure exactly where we're going to get with Green, but it sounds like he's coming back to practice this week with the hopes that he'll be able to play. Sammy Coates, yeah, I've been concerned about Sammy Coates' hand. I think he's going to need every bit of these 2 weeks to recover if, in fact, that laceration opened up. It's really difficult to repair that particular part of the hand. It's a hand that separates a little bit, and that's the area that takes when you catch with your hands, and hopefully Sammy Coates does more often than he has in the past. If that area gets open, it's really a 10 to 14 day recovery period for those stitches in there, and depending on how that area looked after it was busted open, again, I'm assuming that that's what the issue is here, and it's not just pain related to the broken finger, which was really the more minor of the 2 injuries, that it may have been difficult to repair at all, to stitch a second time. So I think we're going to get a pretty good idea of where Coates is on Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe even Monday. If he's back on the practice field and allowed to catch passes on Monday, Tuesday, there's no worries, obviously. But if he's listed as DNP Monday, Tuesday as they come out of the bye, he won't be listed, but we'll hear that. The same thing will go. He may be a little bit more questionable than we expect. Corey Coleman, I think, is going to return next week. Doug Martin, for those of you guys that are new followers or just checking things out on Periscope, I am very skeptical of players who re-aggravate hamstring injuries. There's a high risk of doing that, and we know that any hamstring strain that's aggravated is generally at least, if not more severe than the first one. So it's no surprise that we're going on 2.5 weeks of no practice with Martin. A lot of times it takes guys at least as long to recover from the second injury as it does the first. So I think that Martin is questionable at best for next week, but practice participation is going to tell the tale there as well. Jamal Charles, I think it's going to be a difficult road for him to get back this year. Whatever went down sometime in the later stage of his rehab, all we heard through February and March was that things were going great. And then we started to hear in April and May through OTAs that Andy Reid said we're going to have to rest him a little bit. We're going to use Spencer Ware a little bit more. We're going to find ways to limit Charles' touches. And then he was put on PUP and didn't come back until very, very late, and took him a month to get back on the field at all. And now this late in the game to have some swelling after 14 touches in 2 games, not a good situation. Dion Lewis, I'm still a little bit nervous about. We talked about this over the last week or so, that I could not find a rehab protocol that suggested a player could return from a fixated stress fracture or any fracture of the patella, a few screws there, in less than 10 to 12 weeks. So there's lots of positivity coming from New England where we don't usually see it with Lewis. I think they're going to bring him back slowly, but he needs to get through these next couple of weeks without any setbacks to feel pretty comfortable about him. Yeah, I think Sammy Watkins was positive this week that he's progressed far enough in the rehab that they felt comfortable taking him out of the walking boot and seeing how he goes. It wasn't unexpected. That doesn't mean he's any closer to returning. The most optimistic timetable for him would be practice in week 10, return in week 12. I don't see that happening. I think he's still at least a month away and probably more from practicing, because they're going to be able to, they really want him to come back slowly from this injury this time, because we went from May all the way through August into September without him recovering quickly and well. So there's a chance he comes back this year, but I think they're going to exert caution. And this was the stage last time. We saw him sprint 25 yards. That was a big thing on Twitter early in August, and then he wasn't able to recover. So this is really the important rehab phase for him. But I think we're at least a month away from Watkins. Possible, yes. Likely, nah, I don't think we're quite there yet. What else, guys? A few more minutes here. Yeah, John Brown, I missed a couple of those. Thank you. So, there's a hamstring strain there. I think that is what's going on. It's complicated by the healing process with sickle cell trait. It looks like there's been nothing but positive reports from Bruce Arians. There's a concern, again, this goes with Doug Martin and all those other guys. Anytime there's been a hamstring injury there, you put a player back on the field, allow him to go over 90, 95%, which really doesn't happen in practice, and test that at speed and stress, and you risk aggravation. And we're not outside that time frame with Brown yet. So I think he's going to be a full go, especially with Michael Floyd likely to be down with hamstring injury. I think we're okay. Thomas Rawls is still a couple of weeks away. He's got to be cleared for contact. These guys, that's an injury unlike Moncrief and otherwise, where it's just you can't stay in condition well. So he's got to be cleared to run, which he has been. He's got to be cleared for contact, which he hasn't been. Kristen Michael is playing as well as he is. Not too worried about it. But I think we're probably at least a couple of ways from Rawls going forward. Why does Gronk still wear their arm brace? Comfort. I don't think it's a weakness necessarily. We see J.J. Watt still strap up his elbow from his elbow dislocation years and years ago. I think players, they don't necessarily grow to be dependent on those things. On one hand, we see players try to avoid knee pads, thigh pads, anything that they think slows them down on the lower body. But I think a lot of guys probably strap up a little bit more upper body than you would expect. You'd have to ask Gronkowski that question himself, but I think it's probably more for comfort than anything else. It's really not providing a whole lot of projection. You really can't adequately splint a forearm fracture anyway, and I don't think that's going to be an issue there. I'm still seeing a lot of questions about Miller and Moncrief. We discussed those guys a little bit early. I'll come back and just before we end up here in a few minutes, rediscuss Miller and Moncrief. And Gronk may like the look of the brace too. I don't know. That's why I said you'd have to ask those guys. Jeremy Hill, he's got an AC sprain. Every time he takes a hit on that area, it's going to be a problem. We saw multiple players sort of settle out as the second half here starts, guys, so we'll probably cut this off so you guys get back to the game here shortly. Every time he takes a hit to that area, it's going to be tender and painful, and it's going to linger throughout the rest of the year. We saw that with Randall Cobb last year, lots of other guys. So yes, it could very well be a rest of the season thing. You could almost see that as an overuse injury at this point, in that it's not going to heal until it's rested for a period of time. And does it cost him a couple of snaps a week, a couple of series a week? It just depends on the nature of the hit. You can try to pad that area up a little bit, but it's very difficult for a running back who takes hits on the shoulder and gets taken to the ground on the shoulder for there to be a problem. I'm hoping to see Steve Smith back next week. High ankle sprains are generally 3 to 4 week injuries. We didn't have too much information about a specific grade there, but the hope is that he comes back and practices. Okay, for those of you guys that have hung on toward the end and didn't catch the first 5 minutes, Lamar Miller. I think what's going on there is a bruise in the shoulder with some irritation in the nerve that comes out underneath. That nerve helps the outside of the arm work and oftentimes down to the part of the outside of the hand. So the question for me is this bruising related and just some strength and range of motion stuff, or is there still a nerve issue that they're worried about? If there's a nerve issue they're worried about, they're probably going to treat this similar to how they would treat a stinger, which is to say that I don't know that they're going to allow him to play. So if that's what they're worried about, he's going to have to prove that he has grip strength, arm strength, full range of motion in the shoulder. If he does that, I think he's likely to play. But you're already sort of hearing from Rappaport and Schefter some indication that somebody within the team is worried about him. Is it the coaching staff? Is it the medical staff? Is it a combination of both? Enough to where, as adamant as Miller wants to be saying he'll play, if they don't trust him on the field, then they're not going to put him out there. So I think at this point it's really difficult to know whether or not we're looking at 5 to 10 snaps or 5 to 10 touches or 10 to 12 plus or 15 to 20. I think at this point the trend has not been positive at all. So I don't expect to see him much out there today. Let's just consider him probably 50% of his usual workload, but it could go either way. So hard to project there. How many snaps is Moncrief going to get? I think what I said with Moncrief and Bryant a little bit ago is expect them to get about 75% of what they normally would, and I would lean towards the over rather than the under. Can't replicate game stress and game speed, but they should be in condition to do what they would normally do. The question is how much Dak Prescott and Andrew Luck are willing to look to them when they've not been on the field over the last 4 to 6 weeks. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, guys, I'll be on Twitter if anything crazy happens during inactives, and I'll be around all day to cover any injuries that might happen. I will post a link to the full reference table in Football Guys article on what I expect for availability and game day projections today. So you guys enjoy the games, enjoy the second half here. If anything exciting happens, I'll try to get back on Periscope after the Sunday night game tonight, and we'll cover what's going on throughout the rest of the day. Guys, have a great night and afternoon. Thanks.